With us, and she is one of my all-time favorite poets. She's a very fine thinker as well as a fine poet, and I think she's a fine poet because she is such a fine thinker. The announcements are, the first announcement, as always, is the cell phone announcement. Everyone, please silence your cell phones so that they don't go off during the reading. We'd also like to welcome, we have a group of students from Orem High. We're very pleased to have you here with us today. Next week will be the reading of students who have entered the contest for writing about love, the Valentine's reading. And if you entered the contest, you should receive an email by the end of the day indicating whether or not you've been selected to read it or telling you who the winners are. By the end of today, I will do that. Now, if you submitted, there were a few paper entries, and if you didn't give me an email, maybe you could email me, okay, to be sure that you get a response. Today, there will be a book sale and reading. A book sale and a reception after the reading, as we usually have in the Special Collections classroom. Our invocation will be by Todd Chapman, and then Dirk Oltop will introduce our guest.
Dear Heavenly Father, we give thanks for the opportunity to come before Thee this time. We're so grateful to have Dr. Saje with us. We pray that Thou would bless her as she presents her reading, that she will feel comfortable, that each of us as we listen might be able to both come to appreciate poetry more, to learn from her project and the things that are important to her. We're again grateful for the opportunity to come together and celebrate the arts and the good things it does in all of our lives. And pray for Thy Spirit to be with us all. In the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
We're truly fortunate to have such an accomplished poet residing in Utah, and even more specifically to have her with us today to read. Natasha Saje came to Utah in 1998 to teach at Westminster College, where she is now an associate professor. She also teaches graduate poetry writing at Vermont College. She grew up in northern New Jersey and New York, and she was born in Germany. Not only has Saje received the accolades of the academic world, winning the Agnes Lynch Starrett Prize for Read Under the Skin, and her first book, and the Utah Poetry Book of the Year Award for Bend, her second, but she has also known popular success. Bend, for example, has been through 3 printings, which is exceptional. In addition to being a successful poet, Natasha Saje is a respected scholar, and has published numerous articles in the Writer's Chronicle and other prestigious journals such as the Iowa Review and Essays in Literature. Describing her style, various scholars and critics have said she writes in a voice that is consistent without being predictable. She exhibits a variety of approaches, both formal and experimental, towards verse and form, and that her style and meter run the gamut, from thoughtful and erudite to the playful use of satire. In my personal readings of Saje's poems, I discovered a voice of intelligent humor. I find in her work the inconspicuous print of a writer who has mastered associative movement and learned how to create thoughtful, even thought-provoking imagery. She has an ability to eloquently, almost seamlessly, flow from one idea to the next. Her poems are often scholarly, yet rarely, if ever, assuming, because she does not thrust the ideas onto the reader, but rather extends a welcoming invitation as she points out the power of words to bend perceptions. Please join me in welcoming Natasha Saje.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming today. It's a real pleasure to be here and read to you. I'm going to read poems from first book, second book, and current project. I'm going to start with a poem called Agoraphobia. Without even trying, I can think of a half-dozen women afraid to drive, including my mother. Oh, maybe not afraid, period, but afraid of highways, the big city, cross-country, the Beltway, the high-speed merge, the GW Bridge, the circles in D.C. I always knew it as something to be feared and fought because it crawls up on you like an ant, then embeds itself like a tick that you have to burn out, pluck by the pincers and shake loose. But the trick is finding it, figuring out where it comes from and how it starts. The illness that keeps you inside for a few weeks, burgeoning traffic, or even some small incident barely worth mentioning or hardly noticed. A flat tire, a misplaced key. I remember my hands trembling on the steering wheel of my first car, driving around the block, a new license securely in my purse, and realizing it was no good, that piece of paper. As I grew older, I became conscious of it in other women and saw that it wasn't just driving, that driving was only one facet of this stone, the friend who stayed in after the birth of her second baby, as if suddenly the door had been locked from the inside, and she and her daughter were drenched in gasoline and the world were a burning match. London shrank to the size of her house. After a year, she made her way to the doctor, the supermarket, but she'd never really seen the city, and after a week I knew it better than she, and became her guide. In buses she chattered, not looking where she was going. Is the fear more common in beautiful places? To know that always beyond one's reach is the Place des Vosges or the Pantheon, to be savored in tandem, if at all. Some women never get over it. Their worlds shrink to the size of their bodies and then still smaller, as when they feel their stomachs wrench at the sound of steps on the street. This madness carries itself sanely through the hours as one learns to compensate, having groceries delivered, living through the telephone. Like Marlene Dietrich at the end of her life in a Paris apartment, the feather boas and smoking jackets sold discreetly, piece by piece, to pay for rent. Fear of the marketplace, fear of buying and selling, and of oneself being sold. For when all the clothes and memorabilia were gone, Dietrich knew that her body, the legs once insured by Lloyd's, the gravelly voice, the arched eyebrows, would be next to go. This poem's called Dress Code. Adriana tells me I dress prissy, too neat, too matched, the colors complimentary, the shoes expensive, Italian, always leather, not much jewelry, and all of it real. Even as a teenager who succumbed to platform shoes and bell-bottoms, I stopped short of beads and tie-dye. My mother frowned at frayed edges and pinned hems, loud colors and tight skirts. Proletarian, she'd sigh, her own clothes like mine, today, in order, tasteful, discreet. They make me envy a friend who's never had to work for a living. She carries a plastic purse in lime green and sports black sandals with brown socks in winter. Sometimes I wrap scarves and pin jewelry in odd places, but even when I try to look bohemian or chic, I still come off like a page from a mail order catalog, yoked to double-sewn seams and heavy gray wool. Not even France could change the way I dress. I think of the Comtesse de Riet's bon mot. Only the bourgeois need real jewels. My skin's that of a middle manager's daughter whose family toiled its way up the ladder. Slipping down is just a spot of grease away. This one's called A Male in the Women's Locker Room, and the title clues into the first line. A male in the women's locker room is a shoe in the refrigerator, a mouse in the oven. 5 years old, already a Y chromosome. No, that's not fair. I don't know that he's a boy from the bare chest, short hair. She could be her mother's experiment, like Hemingway. One doesn't have to be a boy to shoot lions shirtless, leaning with cool aplomb against the Jeep. But how else could he have learned to kick the stall door hiding his mother, to move through space as though he owned it, his solid body absorbing molecules of oxygen like M&Ms. With his pudgy baby hands, his skin like talcum, he's too young for an Adam's apple, though his neck shows promise. Of what? Not ice dancing. Maybe it's not that he's male, but that he's clothed in navy trunks, and I'm just about to pull off my things. I could go to a stall, but he's only 5, so I strip. He doesn't crack a smile. What's it like in those joints with a cover charge and tips? Now his mother's doing makeup in the mirror. She doesn't see the way he's watching me, now stark naked. He peers across the bench, the scientist dismantling DNA. I'm a goat in a petting zoo. He takes in my breasts and pubic hair. It's all her fault. That's mean, he's only 5. She couldn't park him like a car. But no father would bring his daughter to look at naked men. If this were Europe, would I care? The pilgrims carried modesty like syphilis. In Sweden, he'd have seen so many naked women, I doubt he'd stare. At 3, he'd be cute, like an animal. At least he's not 10 or 21. Then I let myself think what I would do. I think a lot of poets have poems about grade school teachers because they make such an impression on you. So here's mine. Miss Cotton survived a bus wreck where everyone else died. She also cured her mother of cancer, gave herself a tracheotomy, lifted a car off a boy's leg. 50-ish and looming in large knit suits in Oxford, she smelled of camphor and powder too dark for her skin. I sat in the bad row, one of those who talked during lessons, passed notes in pens. She told me I was the kind who needed beating to obey. My punishments were limited to afternoons alone with her, describing the taste of cow's blood, her cousin's amputated feet. She comes to mind at the supermarket, and when I stand in front of 4th graders. Then she rushes through me like a train, and I want to tell a truth so slant it makes the soft hair on their bodies rise and wave, makes them know that when the sky is falling, they can stretch their arms to greet it and not be crushed. This poem is called Appetites, and the first line is in German, but the poem will translate it. Dein Zug kennt kein Bahnhof, my mother would tell me, astonished at how much I could consume of whatever pleased me, ice cream or chocolates, and later smoked salmon, Westphalian ham. Your train knows no station. Now that I'm an adult, my train knows several stations, though sometimes it's a greed express, ripping through an entire apple tart, a quart of blueberries, a pound of camembert. All children are greedy until they learn to curb unattractive habits, like chewing fingernails or picking noses. From Old English, Gredig, Beowulf didn't worry about how he looked, chowing down a leg of ox or a few pheasants whole. A friend taps his wife's frail wrist. Honey, wouldn't sorbet be better than ice cream? Some trains idle and weeds then grow between their tracks. Once for 2 weeks I ate nothing, drinking only mineral water. I imagined myself light as an airmail letter. A man's hands could encircle my waist. I climbed flights of stairs one at a time, panting. The memory makes me see myself, stare at the shape of a woman who swims in my pool. Her thighs have the heft of a good dictionary. She's never sick. She can lift a lawnmower over the hedge. She's the only conductor on her train, and she knows which stations are worth stopping for. This next poem is I think of it as an ars poetica. It's called Water Music. Once her wide net could catch all kinds of fish, all day and all night, soft and fleshy weeks, triggers fast-finned, hard-spiked urchins and wall-eyed pikes, and stentor, plankton, orange krill. She was never hungry, and after a while the stuff made wallpaper, postcards, pumice stones. Then she learned how unladylike it looked, that huge stinking thing trailing behind, and she wanted to rip it apart, but its skeins were stronger than silk, so she became fastidious instead, throwing stuff back and thinking, not this one, not that one, saying, sorry, sorry. When they stained her clothes, she threw them away. When they looked at her funny, she threw them away. When she was afraid she'd be caught, she threw them away. She spent most of her time throwing. That lasted a long, long while, half the life of a peach tree, the entire life of the average house cat. Her arms grew so tired she couldn't swim, and she found herself beached, the net draped around her like a bridal gown. The only thing she could do was read the dictionary, which she used like a phone book, calling up each word and waiting to hear a voice on the other side. Hello? Hello? The words hung up as soon as she heard her, as soon as they heard her. One day in the Peas, between Plagal, a medieval mode with a range from the fourth below to the fifth above, and plague, till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled, she found plagiarism, from Latin for kidnap, from plaga for net. Knowing what to call it was such an immense relief. She fairly hummed with happiness, specifically Handel's water music, to which she added the lyrics, mea culpa, mea culpa. She'd just have to learn to fish so well, people would admire her for it, saying, oh, what a big fine net you have, and oh, what a deep briny smell. And this is another Ars Poetica. It's called A Minor Riot at the Mint, and it has a epigraph from Ben Jonson. Custom is the most certain mistress of language, as the public stamp makes current money. But we must not be too frequent with the mint, everyday coining. Into my pocket slips a folded note, creased like labia, cashed with private promise, pea blossoms in broth, and my impeto pleasure in thinking the missive for me, the edges keen against my thumb, my plotting to be alone and open it. Is it tame as a Hepplewhite chair, or nubile as a pitchfork? The ship rolls through open water, dirty in the bay around Rio. I'm a crazy sailor on the gravy boat, a woman of means. This letter's mine only till St. Geoffrey's Day, and if the paper degrades, that's how it goes with money. I'll wave the wealth where any frigate bird can snatch it. Oh, my Macintosh, my Bilbo, my cistern, my confiture, I love you so much you breathe me away. I should explain that St. Geoffrey's Day in the Renaissance, post-Renaissance, there is no St. Geoffrey, right? So St. Geoffrey's Day was a way of saying like till Niagara Falls, like never. And in petto means to the chest. Okay, this is in prose, and it has no punctuation, so I'm going to try to read it to get that across. It's called Fruit. Pitting a flat of sour cherries, squeezing fingers through crisp skins, takes all day thinking silly mind games and how the still life makes me happy, even though the light is fading and someone's stolen the marigolds out front, and maybe that's why I spend 6 hours finding pits in order to throw them out, betting on whether I've got the last one, and if I do, then I will be loved, and if I'm not, then I'll be loved by someone else. I should explain, I lived in Baltimore a long time, and the crime and drug was so bad, problem was so bad that people would dig the plants out of your yard to sell them. So yeah, my marigolds were actually stolen. This is my version of the Heloise de Abelard story. Heloise was the student of the monk Abelard, and they fell in love and were separated, discovered and separated for many years, but they both wrote to each other afterwards. So this is my version of Heloise speaking to Abelard. If you were here, my love, I would tear the pages of my books, pleat them into baskets for collecting cherries, the kind that do not bleed. I would strip the bark from birches and build a coffin for our fears. Clouds would carry it to Rome. I would turn into a river fluke to enter the soft soles of your feet. And I would lie with you on the stone floor of the chapel, morning light filtering through panes. My love, if you were here, you would fog the cold surface of my soul with your breath, and I would turn to you and say, if you were not here, Heloise would be writing. The next poem I'm going to read has the title of a book by Cotton Mather. Gosh, I'll say that. And it has an epigraph from him. Muses are no better than harlots. And he said that in 1726, and the title of his book and the title of my poem is Wonders of the Invisible World. And I'm going to mess up the Latin because I don't speak Latin, and it has a Latin line, but the Latin is, I think it's pretty clear. Strange that he mentions the muses. Strange that he mentions muses. Demons, yes. God, of course. But harlots? Perhaps in his last year, nearly destitute, having outlived 13 of his children, the doctor of divinity, this man who once wrote in his diary about the wife who almost killed him with her madness, misera mea conjus, in proximos illos veros satanicos, felt another sorceress nuzzling his ears about the price of flesh before spinning it into words. And he knew that she too would leave him bereft of a sweet and wicked sustenance. Or perhaps he remembered 30 years before the time of the devils coming down in great wrath, too many tongues and hearts set on fire of hell. And he imagined a world pervaded by a cutting yellow wind, with wraith-like women moving soul to soul, streaming like water off a roof, flooding the mouth of every man who had ever meant to hang them. So he had a wife who was crazy, and it's believed she was suffering from heavy metal poisoning. You know, it's hard to tell historically why, you know, people were crazy, but they ate a lot of off-lead dishes back then. And she didn't speak Latin, so he kept a diary in Latin so that she wouldn't read it. And he complains about his crazy wife in Latin in his diary. So this next poem was spurred by an interview that Terry Gross did with the poet Billy Collins that was aired on NPR, in which Terry says to Billy, "Oh, Billy, you're not one of those poets who lead your readers into the dark basement." And I thought, I want to be a poet who leads readers into the dark basement. So this one's called Welcome Reader. Welcome, reader, to the cellar, where you'll be pointed at the cement ceiling and its drips of condensation. How will they tumble, each unpredictable drop? A whole cloud of philosophy condensed into a drop of grammar. Will you think of me in my sunny kitchen with its pots of basil and rosemary, baking blueberry crisp, opening the door now and then to let the scent waft down? Or napping under a comforter, dreaming of you? No, reader, Because if you're in the basement, so am I. And we'll have Wittgenstein. The world is everything that is the case. Everything is, as it were, in a space of possible atomic facts. Think of the space as empty, but not of the thing without the space. That'll make time crawl. Our sentence a sentence, a term hard to change. We'll be the Houdinis of our quaint bunker, and the deeper we go, the more the pleasure of digging will be its own reward. Pleasantly tired arms, not the glow of China in the distance. The limits of our language mean the limits of our world. Sure, it'd be easier to live in a shore house built on pylons of treated lumber, but who wants air underfoot? Trust me, soon the rooms upstairs will seem garish, department store aisles filled with everything we don't need. Okay, this next poem is called Wave. A few memories float. 2 orange cats entwined on the green armchair. Birthday lunch with my mother in the department store tea room when women still wore hats and white gloves. But most are lost. An only child, center of her parents' world, whose childhood seems to have disappeared except when wind churns up a shell. The spring I had measles and lay outside wrapped in blankets reading. My parents' stories, always the same ones. I never asked for anything. I wouldn't eat what they prepared. Someone said childhood would be a source, but how to access? That person must have had siblings. Telling a story makes it true, and having no one care about it makes it disappear. When my mother and my aunt argue about what happened, or one of them entirely forgets a wound, I see I have only the little I've made myself, and I don't trust it. Explore the depths and love the difficult, Rilke said. But when I tell myself to remember whatever sadness and pain there were, I can't. The beach glass past tumbled smooth and opaque from scratches. My childhood swallowed the way the ocean absorbs debris, even the occasional ship. So this next poem is called We Saw No Caribou, and the title goes into the first line, and it was spurred by hiking in Quebec. And also an essay by John Berger on zoos. And something else that I can't remember anymore. So we saw no caribou, except on metal signs, the cartooned antlers ungainly, black against yellow. Were we not still enough when the heat of day had dissolved and the animals coolly made their way into the blue dusk? We drank their water, ruddled from the rocks, and shared their air, clean as absence. We would have photographed them, of course, along with the Montmorency Falls, the Ile d'Orléans, notched on memory's belt, accreted. And if we had beheld caribou, moose, or cougar, would the light have blessed us like the Shroud of Turin, or simply been allied with one moment, contained in time by the word vacation? In a Bierstadt painting, they'd be larger than the Indians, smaller than the sky, part of the grandeur. Disney would make them friendly, laughable, and safe. In a zoo, we'd say forlorn, circumscribed by fake rocks and pools. In our photographs, a sheared fur of trees wraps the hills. Below us, the lakes stretch and curl. Around our bodies, an altitude, around our heads, a nimbus. And in the center, freed of their anchor in God, our eyes look back at our immanent selves. This poem is Tale, and that's the title, and it's a homonym. It reverberates both ways. And it came from a dream, and I believe that when you write a poem about a dream, you have to analyze the dream in order to really write a good poem about it. In other words, you have to sort of understand what your unconscious was saying to you. So I hope I did that. At a party, a woman tells the guests she's got a tale. And I, of course, think she means a story. But then she gets up, and emerging boldly from her skirt is her tail. It's mouse gray and strong, strong enough for climbing. And oh, on the end it's got a hand covered in fur, reaching past her knees when she stands. She wraps it around her hips when it's not wanted. By now the others have lost interest. They're watching basketball on TV. What a sight she'd be in court, tapping a gavel, writing a note, and pointing to the plaintiff all at once. Where can I get one, I ask. But she shakes her head. It's nothing you can buy. It's free to anyone who wants one and can show they won't abuse it. But why doesn't everyone, I cry. And then another thought creeps in. I hardly use the limbs I have. I should examine her tail for lice. With sadness in her mien, she nods. Yes, you'd think it would be common. You'd think it would be prized. Okay, this is a poem where the title is also the last line, but I'm not going to read the last line, so you have to remember what the title is. So open that door. Nothing can get through. Well, maybe some ants, unaware that what marches into the world does not always return. Ants get in everywhere, and they know where they're going. And the rhinoceros, dynamite packed into the horn and a long fuse wrapped inside the body, its tail lit by fiery scent. In recompense for a lifetime of eating grass, the blind and ship-like rhino can splinter that door. But the magpie, incessant as tropical rain, the black-billed, white-bellied pike-picas, silly with the sound of its own iridescent cheer, continuous as stars we can't see shining, so that someone sitting inside a house while a magpie pipes outside cannot but eventually, in irritation and amazement, this poem is a true story, but you have to substitute for the word queen, you have to substitute the word college president. It's called The Statues. One morning, the people of the Capitol, this is a prose, it's a story. One morning, the people of the Capitol awoke to dozens of bronze statues. In front of Parliament, a horse and rider, both the size of Great Danes. Behind the concert hall, a waif in a tutu on a tree stump playing a huge violin. In the library lobby, a creature with a low forehead, protruding teeth, and hairless paws, a cross between a cocker spaniel and a warthog. The queen, it seems, had cast enlargements of the miniatures on her dressing table. It was rumored that the statues contained secret cameras and that a royal eavesdropper had been appointed to monitor conversations. In protest, the citizens tied balloons to hats and gave the warthog sunglasses. They placed mounds of chestnuts below the rear ends of horses. The philosophers found a lesson in irony. The doctors wondered if the queen was senile. The artists, of course, hurt most deeply. Surrounded by such ugliness, how could they teach beauty? But the people learned to live with the statues. The queen had, after all, put bread on their plates. Although there was a precipitous rise in both melancholia and glaucoma, it was like living with the sound of a cracking whip. Did the queen know, the people wondered, that when she died, the statues would be melted into a coffin for her, with her body like a ladybug inside a tuna fish can? It would take an entire regiment to carry the bier. And yes, indeed, when our college president left, the first thing that left with her was the statues. They went into, we don't know what happened to them though. They went into storage somewhere, or they were sold on eBay. And here's another prose piece. This one's called Graphology. I do handwriting analysis, so you have to be careful. If I don't know you when you write to me by hand, then I know you through your handwriting. Whenever she met someone, she secretly analyzed their handwriting. She wondered if these insights were illicitly gained, like wiretapping, but really reasoned that graphology was merely close attention to the person without the distraction of interaction. Each element of the psyche had its equivalent mark on paper. The dominant upper zone of one friend indicated spirituality, the crowded letters of another, grief. Every so often she analyzed her own handwriting. She trained herself to write in the way she wanted to be read. Her capital I was simple and erect. Her small d showed creativity without affectation. Her spacing suggested generosity and goodwill, with a sense of social boundaries. At one point, she saw her lower zone getting smaller and she made an effort to be more sensuous. Another time she noticed that the distance between her lines had increased, indicating isolation. Someone she loved was slipping away from her, like a fish in a stream of water. But she did not know, until she saw her splayed fingers, that she had let the fish go. I'll just read more poems from the book and then a couple new ones. This one's called The Art of the Novel. I used to be a scholar of novels. In 1790, a woman could die by falling for her guardian, who happens to be a priest, or a man who is penniless. A simple story, ruined. As if a woman were a building and loved centuries of bad weather. A mirror carried on a highway, said Stendhal, and in the case of Emma Bovary or Lily Bart, a highway to hell, with me riding shotgun. Did I like the relentless bleakness because Emma's not me, or because she could be me? Years spent in a haze of fiction, living through characters, writing about them, looking for loopholes and cloth woven tight. Perhaps nothing's changed. Love is still fatal, except today she starts her own company. But I've had it with this form of desire, this continuous dream. I can't read in the past tense, those surprising but inevitable endings. So farewell, Tess, Mole, and Clarissa, Miss Bennet and Miss Milner, Isabel and Scarlett. And for the record novel, I abandon you. You who are, Lukács said, the epic of a world abandoned by God. You who made my world bigger and kept me on the beltway, life transformed into destiny. My odometers clicked past the point of counting. I now prefer footpaths or no paths and thickly wooded country, the moon. So I'm going to end with a couple of new poems. They're from an abecedarian book. This first one is called Vanessa Redgrave marries Franco Nero after 40 years, which is a piece of People magazine type gossip, which is true, right? And the form, oh, I don't think I'll say anything about the form, and maybe you can figure it out from the lines. Easily the nicest bit I've read all evening. Fine piece of frivolous gossip that is also oddly gratifying. Hey, at 13 I had a crush on Richard Harris. Imagined myself as Guinevere, caught between illicit joy and mortal jeopardy. Knowledge is carnal, more dangerous than kissing. Later I learned that loyalty means sacrifice in most things, including marriage. No, at 13 I thought deception noble, or at least an epic opportunity, promising passion more than panic. Question: what constitutes a qualm? Reveals a glimmer of remorse. Scooter Libby should have had one, divulging secrets, talking to the New York Times. Unless he was serving his own weird utopia. Valerie loses her spy job, and once adulterous Vanessa walks to the altar, older and wiser. Xing out law and keeping open morality's X factor yields a bright and ever-bouncing yo-yo. Zeal for love or power comes at what cost? Zoom ahead 1,300 years, and both Scooter and Vanessa are footnotes, if that. Bona fides can't mean the same thing to everyone, just as Camelot's dream, V and F notwithstanding, was destined to be dash. I realize that most of you don't know that in the movie version of Camelot, Vanessa Redgrave, who plays Guinevere, and Franco Nero, who plays Lancelot, had an affair and fell in love. And they had a son, like a year later, who's now 40 years old. So, sorry to not give you that essential piece of information before reading the poem, but, and I'll just read, one or two. I think I'll just read one more poem. So, is that right? About time? Okay. Okay, this one is a letter to the Fisher cat. If you don't know what that is, I think the poem will sort of tell you. And the Latin name for this animal is Martes penante. So, dear Fisher cat, never seen you in the flesh. I've seen a cousin, Martes martis, stuffed in a shop window in Bavaria, where they chew wiring in cars, and others, Martes zibellina, turned into a coat thicker than mink, the price of a house. I tried it on with awe. A third, Martes Fiona, I watched on YouTube, the woman holding the camera cooing while the small, shy animal nosed around her terrace in the English countryside. Your name in Croatian, kuna, is currency. 7 million years old, much older than Homo, and certainly sapiens. Trapped to the brink of extinction, you came back. You are to the others as the javelina is to the wild boar, a new world clade. Neither fisher nor cat. Some people love bears or whales or whooping cranes. I love you. Your sweet round ears and button nose, your fur heavy as the robe of a queen, your claws unsheathed in paws the size of a child's hand. You could be a toy, a cartoon, a pet, if it weren't for your carnivorous drive, your solitary soul. Your jaws can kill a porcupine, attacking snout first from below, eating it inside out. You cross the narrowest gap in the forest opening. You sleep in the crook of a beach in old-growth canopy. I'll see you someday, close range. I'll be the rabbit curled in the corner of the parsley garden, and you'll be there, unnoticed until too late, beyond any sound my throat could make.
do have 5 minutes, so if you would like to ask questions of Natasha.
You'll have to go up, look up that animal on YouTube so you can see what they look like. Yeah. Reading and then talking about books with people who also like to read. So yeah, you don't know, I have a very dear poetry friend who never went to college, and she's one of the smartest, best read people I know. So you don't need the institution to make you into a writer or a reader. It helps. I mean, it gives you a structure and a path that you can follow in the future, but you don't necessarily need it. So read books and find a book group or a writing group. Any other questions? Yeah. I did, yeah, and I realize now that it was a kind of anorexia. I did it because a friend of mine, I was 20 years old, what did I know? A friend told me that when you fast, you experience a kind of euphoria that's kind of like drug. I never did any drugs, but I wanted to experience this euphoria. So I did, and it was very hard for the first 3 days. I didn't eat anything, and the craving was hard. And then it was extremely easy. So I was almost repulsed by food, and had no interest in eating. And then I did it intelligently, and then when I started eating again, it was very, very gradual. But don't do this. Don't do this. It's not worth it. You do get euphoric, and you feel, oh, God, that's great. But it messed up my metabolism for years later. And my body went into kind of starvation mode and wanted to hold on to every calorie, so that I got chubby. So it took years to right that again. So don't be tempted to do it. I know that in some religions that fasting is part of it, but I don't think it's good for you. Any other questions? Yes. Just do it. Like the Nike ad, huh? Do it and read it. And you probably, something you heard today will make you want to write. So follow that impulse and that urge. And keep going to readings and keep reading books. Because that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from necessarily life experience. It comes from words, from hearing words. Reading words and hearing words. Any other questions? Yes?
You seem to have a pretty eclectic subject matter. What do you feel inspires you?
Well, language, actually. I love words. So things that people say, like the Terry Gross interview with Billy Collins, that make me want to talk back. Or things that I see or think about. The fact that an animal I'm obsessed with but I've never seen. Any other? Hi. Well, thank you. Good.
We want to thank Natasha for that wonderful reading. We invite you to join us for the reception and the book sale. There will be books for sale. And come next week for the Valentine's reading.
loss, losses in my own life, loss in general. And when I've come to understand, after writing about loss for a long time, that when I'm writing about loss, I'm not writing about emptiness, but I'm writing about, there's a rabbi that says the only whole heart is a broken one. And I'm writing about the wholeness found in brokenness, if that makes any sense. That these kinds of losses in our life are what connect us to other people and make us whole. And so for me, it was finding the kind of story behind the loss. How does Jerry's death matter to me, but then to others? So that was what I think drove me, getting past beneath the loss and trying to investigate the wholeness there. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.